Yes, Sam.
Rick Perry will be trying to get into the meeting. He
Yes.
just sent me an email.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, you're free to proceed.
Okay, I would like to call to order this virtual regular meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission on Friday, November 13th, 2020. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Bryan.
Here, present.
Covington.
Present.
Hoffman.
Present.
Ms. Lucier.
Here.
Ms. Maucha.
Present.
Mr. Patterson.
Present.
Strange.
Present.
Mr. Trunzo.
Here.
And myself here.
Wonderful. The meeting is now in order at 1:31 p.m. with a quorum of the members present. So, Anne, would you please provide verification of the meeting notice?
The agenda for the Planning Commission regular meeting was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on November 6th. Public notice for preliminary review of partitioning application number 1020-05 for the property located at 54 and 56 Rehoboth Avenue was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on October 22nd. Notice was published in Cape Gazette on October 27th and October 30th, Coast Press on November 4th, and Delaware State News on October 28th and 29th. Notification specific to this project was mailed out to property owners within 200 feet, and signage was posted on the property. Public notice for public hearing of site plan review application number 0920-04 for the property located at 46 Columbia Avenue was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on October 22nd. Notice was published in Cape Gazette on October 27th and October 30th, Coast Press on November 4th, and Delaware State News on October 28th and October 29th. Notification specific to this project was mailed out to property owners within 200 feet, and signage was posted on the property. Vice Chair, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Anne. Next, I'd like to move on to the approval of meeting minutes. And I'd like to recognize that Ms. Womack has been very busy getting our meeting minutes caught up. I received them believing that she's worked around the clock in the past week to do them because they came at a lot of different hours. And we're very grateful that you did that. Thank you, Anne. So my recommendation is going to be that we handle these separately. Why don't we do the regular meeting held on October 9th, 2020 first, the present board, that involves the present board, and then the other four we'll handle as a group. Everybody's okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Would somebody make a motion for the October 9th, 2020 meeting?
So moved, Brian.
Okay. Moved and second. So all in favor of approving the meeting minutes for October 9th, 2020, please say yes.
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 Any noes or abstentions? Okay, those are approved. Now, the other group, we have meeting minutes from August. There was a special meeting of August 20, I'm sorry. There was a workshop meeting of August 21st, then a special meeting of August 28th. And then on September 11th, we had our regular meeting and there was an executive session. Did anybody have any comments, corrections for any of those?
Mike Bryan would abstain since I was not on the board.
Okay, that's great. And could we have a motion for approval of those four sets of minutes?
I'll move for approval. I'll second them.
Okay, great. So we have our motion for approval. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Any no votes? Any abstentions?
Yes, Mike Bryan.
And Brian Patterson abstain.
Okay, and we have 2 abstentions, Mike Bryan and Brian Patterson. Thank you very much. That brings us up to date on meeting minutes. And again, thank you, Ann, very much. So the next item on the agenda is correspondence. And Ann, is there any additional correspondence that's?
Hey, Jeff, don't
yes.
we have to approve the executive session held on September 11th? Or
Oh, we did.
What about the regular meeting held on September 11th?
So I did those as a group.
Okay,
I may have
missed them
moved
as-
too quickly,
okay.
sorry.
I'm sorry, I missed them as a group. Okay.
Okay, great, thanks. So Ann, is there any additional correspondence to report?
There's no correspondence.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to ask if anybody has any agenda changes, and I'd like to announce one. There will not be an executive session today when we get to the Clear Space Rehoboth Spotlight. I had a tentative hold on there, not knowing how the process was unfolding. And that is not necessary. So just regard what it says on the agenda about executive session. We're not having that, but we will have a discussion of the latest developments from yesterday when we get to that point. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. I don't see Debbie File.
Oh.
Oh, that's okay. So we'll okay. Well, we will take things a little bit out of order here. Shall we move on? I apologize for that. I'm sure Debbie will be joining us.
Jeff, do you want me to try to call her?
Yeah, if someone could get a text or a call, it would be great because we could get her in.
The correspondence, I think, has her number. I'll try to reach her.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so I'd like to move on to election of officers. And as you all know, at the October 9th meeting, we discussed and reviewed the process for election of officers. I gave the notice to the PC group to send in your nominations. Those nominations were sent to Ann Womack within 5 days of this meeting. She compiled them and notified all of us. And I'm super happy to report that we have at least one person raising their hand for all positions. So I commend everybody for their consideration and nomination efforts. So, so we need to have an election. And I just want to highlight a few things that are in the bylaws about elections again. And that is that in paragraph 5, near the end, so we're pretty open about how the elections are being held. The election of officers of the Planning Commission shall be conducted in such a manner and in good faith by the chairperson, consistent with applicable law, so as to mitigate any potential adverse effects on the collegiality of the Planning Commission. And that's what I considered most of all when I put together an election process. As you know, we do have to conduct this as an open ballot. So there's always some ego sensitivities here, which I'm sure we're going to be careful about. And what I would like to do is have a since we have one nomination for secretary, Lee Weber, one for chair, myself, and 2 for vice chair, Rachel Macha and Brian Patterson. I'd like to handle the order as secretary, chair, and then vice chair. So to do that, what I'm recommending is that we have a, if we just have a motion, we'll have a motion for secretary, and then a motion for chair, and then we can take our vote. And then for the vice chair position, I'd like to ask the two candidates to speak for a few minutes about why they want to be vice chair. We'll all listen, and then we'll have a roll call vote for that position. As you know, with a roll call vote, you can make an additional comment about the reason why you voted. If you feel like you need to do that, but it's not necessary. No one's obligated to say more than yes or no. And I would like to have the roll called in alphabetical order, with the chair going last, and each person can simply say the name of the person that they're voting for. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
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 I see all nodding heads. Okay, so I think this is going to work. So, so first, I will ask if someone would like to make the motion for Lee Weber for secretary.
I'll make the motion to support
I'll
the secretary.
We have that. So, I guess we should do a roll call for all three positions. Does that matter, Glenn? I'm sorry.
It doesn't matter for election of officers, but because we're in the Zoom environment, let's go ahead and do it that way.
Okay, so let's have a call of the roll. Lee, I hate to ask you to do that, but would you mind? Sorry, I didn't plan for that part.
No worries. Mr. Bryan,
Brian votes yes.
Mr. Covington,
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman,
I vote yes.
Ms. Lucier,
Yes.
Ms. Matcha,
Yes.
Mr. Patterson,
Yes.
Strange,
Yes.
and Mr. Trunzo last.
Yes. Thank you, Lee. You're elected. Congratulations.
Yes.
Okay, so the next one for chair will probably be. I'm sure I forgot something that I should have done to make it a little bit more elegant, but I will again ask for a motion from a member for myself for chair.
I make the motion to nominate Jeff as chairman.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So, Mr. Weber, would you mind reading the roll again?
Sure. Mr. Bryan,
Brian votes yes.
Mr. Covington,
Yes.
Kaufman,
Yes. Happy to do it.
Ms. Lucier,
Yes.
Ms. Matcha,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
Mr. Strange,
Yes. And I'd like to say that I think that Jeff has done a spectacular job previously in his capacity before moving to this new level. And I think his experience, knowledge, and dedication is a great example for all of us and for others that eventually may join the board.
I agree.
Well said.
Thank you.
and myself is a yes. And Mr. Trunzo?
Since they're all yeses, I think I'll try to be magnanimous and abstain. How's that? But thank you, everybody, for your kind words.
You proved Mike's point.
I certainly hope by the end of today's meeting you still feel that way. So far so good. So that brings us to vice chair, and it's exciting that we have people willing to do this, and I'm excited that we have two great candidates. And if we're ready to proceed, I was going to ask each candidate, going in alphabetical order, to give us a few minutes about why you would like to be vice chair. And Rachel, that would mean you go first.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for this opportunity to talk and also to run as vice chair. As you know, I joined the Planning Commission about a year ago, a little over a year ago, and it's been a great experience. I'm a full-time resident here in Rehoboth. I've owned property for 20 years. I've been a full-time resident for about 3 years now, and have really enjoyed getting more involved in the city and leveraging my knowledge, my business background, my education, and honestly, just the diversity from a profile standpoint, I think is important too. I've raised my 5 kids coming to Rehoboth every summer, and they've all worked in Rehoboth. since they were 14 years old during the summer. And so I feel like I've had a lot of exposure to businesses as well as residents. And I've also had a great opportunity to run for commissioner, as you know, this last year, which also gave me a lot of opportunity to meet a lot of folks in the community and understand the concerns that they have. In particular, I'll just point out the CDP. I've spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort into that, and feel that I could certainly work very closely with Jeff as we start to come down the home stretch on that document and that important piece of work. So those are, I think, my kind of key reasons why I'd be interested in this vice chair role. Any
Thank
questions?
you, Rachel. That's very helpful. We appreciate it. And Brian, would you like to go?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to everybody for giving me a couple minutes. I think I'd be a great asset to the Planning Commission in the vice chair role, based mainly on my more than 15 years of experience volunteering in Rehoboth City government, dating back at least to the Architectural Review Board Task Force in 2006, where we prepared the design manual that is still used in building and licensing today, in a wide-ranging task force that included many folks that are still sort of luminaries in our community. Everyone from Joe Maggio and Larry Misleski to Patrick Gossett and Linda Kaufman and so many others that I've been working with now for so many years. I was on the Planning Commission for 9 years until 2 years ago, and so it's great to be back. In the Planning Commission, I have been secretary, I have been vice chair previously. I worked on the 2010 CDP and the 2015 CDP update. Been through countless partitionings and major subdivision and site plan reviews, controversial and uncontroversial ones, including the Oak Grove Motor Court, Beach Walk, the Avenue Inn expansion, the Rehoboth Beach Elementary School, and several others. And I also had the opportunity to be a primary drafter of some of the signal achievements of the Planning Commission over those years, including the ordinance on lake buffers to protect the city's lakes from silting and contamination, and a lot of work that we did preparing a revised tree ordinance, which, however, was not ultimately adopted by the mayor and commissioners, but still was the basis for further work that I did with Hoyt Decker, supporting his Law and Oversight Committee on their further proposal to update the tree ordinance. So a lot of experience working with people, all different backgrounds and points of view, and I think that it would be I'd be delighted to be vice chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Rachel. So let's see, just reading my notes again. Okay, so this time we will have a roll call vote. We will go alphabetical. The chair will go last. And folks, when called upon, can state their preference, or I guess you could abstain. And you can give a reason if you feel so moved, but you are not required to. So everybody is good with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Lee, would you start the roll call, please?
Sure. Mr. Bryan.
Yes, sir. Can I preface my vote by saying a vote for one is not a vote against the other? I look forward to working with everybody.
Well said. Thank you.
And I would vote for Brian Patterson.
Covington.
I vote for Rachel Matcha.
Well, first I would note that we have two really well qualified candidates, although I don't know Brian very well. But I vote for Rachel. I think she has the most familiarity with the current issue – based upon her experience on the board so far. So I vote for Rachel.
Ms. Lucier.
Yes, I want to thank both of them, both Rachel and Brian, for volunteering to work for this. It's quite a job, and so we are grateful for their volunteering. The way I see it, the next few years are major projects are going to be coming before the commission, which is Baymart, Bellhaven, the Langford property. But presently we have Clear Space and CDP. And I am voting for Brian Patterson because of his, I recognize it, the depth and breadth of his experience. And also because he's a lawyer, I like the idea of him working very closely with Jeff, as is going to be necessary in the next few years. And I think that his experience and legal background will serve not only Jeff well, but all of us. So therefore, I cast my vote for Brian.
Ms. Matcha.
I'll vote for Rachel.
You tell us why?
I've already given you a couple of minutes on my background and why I think I should. Right.
I'm kidding.
So we'll go from there.
Patterson.
I'll vote for Brian Patterson for the reasons stated.
Strange.
I agree with Mike's comments that a vote for one is not a vote against the other, that we have two qualified candidates. But I've had the privilege of serving with Brian Patterson. He took over for me when I had to withdraw as vice chair due to my heart attack. And what's great is to amplify even further what Joyce said is Brian as an attorney, his intellectual acuity is quite fantastic. That goes outside the depth and breadth of the law alone. And that's a quality I think that's extremely important as we go forward with the litigious nature that seems to be occurring at a much higher rate of speed over these last few years. But just as an individual and a quality person, just like Rachel, both quality people, but I vote for Brian.
Okay, and as far as myself, I also want to thank both the candidates. I know it does involve some level of work, and we really appreciate that. And it's great to have such good candidates, as well as the Planning Commission. I think we just have a lot of really talented people on the Planning Commission, which I think is a great thing. It's a tough decision. I'm going to vote for Rachel because of her involvement on the CDP, familiarity with the issues from day one. But once again, it's not a vote against Brian.
Okay, that leaves me. So I was hoping this would not happen, but I sort of thought it might. I had considered abstaining, and that's what I had planned to do if the first round turned out like this, because I didn't want to make the decision. But I've changed my thinking a little bit about this overnight, and the things that I'm concerned about with my first year on the Planning Commission are all of us being successful. And I know we're going to be successful because all of you are here. But I feel like I lack the attorney skills that are really necessary. And I've been relying on all of you. And in the last week, I've been particularly busy. So just in terms of the commission being as successful as possible and having a leadership team that has an attorney on it, I'm going to vote for Brian. Okay, so I think we're done. I want to thank everybody who participated so eloquently and voiced support for everyone. I commend everybody who put their name forward and put yourself out there. And we're ready to move forward. Anybody have anything else they'd like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to move to make the vote unanimous so that the record would reflect that we all voted unanimously for, in this case, it would be Brian Patterson. So I don't know if anyone would support that.
I don't support it. I think you've already taken a vote. It's already public. For us to come around now and say it's unanimous, I think is hypocrisy, but that's my opinion.
Often do that in the past in other situations, but I understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen, for bringing that option to our attention. And I think we agree that the elections are closed and we're ready to move on at this point. So thank you, everybody. Okay, so I see Debbie has joined us. Hi, Debbie. So we're ready to go to old business A, the CDP update.
I apologize. I had the meeting scheduled for 2, and I want to thank Rachel for reaching out to me via email to say, where are you? And thanks for inviting me. So with that, I'd like to produce, I see you have a lengthy agenda, so I'd like to give you an update on where we're at. And Max or Ann, do you want to put the presentation or would you like me to share my screen?
You can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, I will do that now. Can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
And is it a full screen or is it the subdued screen?
It's full screen.
Okay, great. All right, so today is November 13th.
Friday.
Can you see the next, the project scope? I just want to make sure we're on the same.
This is still the title page.
Okay, well, I got to share the other screen then real quick. 1 minute. Jeff and I usually get to test this out, so I missed our weekly. Let me do this slideshow. I think this one's gonna work. All right. Do you see the next one?
Title screen, project update.
Okay, 1 second. One more minute, I apologize for that. Screen 2, screen. I'm gonna go to this one. Okay, from the beginning, let's do. So do you see the modified version, Jeff? To the left, do you see all the slides?
Yeah, so everything is in a row on the left and the big one is to the right.
I'm gonna go see if it'll take me from the beginning here.
You're on the first slide now.
All right, we're gonna do it. Can everybody see this okay if I run it through this way?
Yes. I think this is fine.
Yeah.
So as you see in phase 3, this is just a quick update. 1, 2 are completed. 3, we're about 3/4 of the way done, which the last meeting we didn't have anything filled in here. So we're making great progress on pulling the final remaining information into the plan. The real update today for you is the mapping analysis update. So we're still coordinated with the city, county, state. After our last meeting, we actually did our parcel analysis completion on October 5th. We sent the city the verification list on the same day, which was October 5th, which is to go through every single parcel and analyze and look at any discrepancies or things that match up. Anticipated having the verification and comments back on October 12th. It is to be determined. We have a meeting next week to go over where we're at with the city, with Glenn, myself, and the town manager and some staff. So as soon as that date comes out, when we'll know when we can get it to the county, as you've seen before, we will then go to Sussex County. We'll be reviewing the information to bring it all current and updated. They will then plug it over to the state service, which is First Map. And that overlays, as we've talked to in the past, that overlays with our environmental, all the different layers we have, transportation, etc. And then we can recreate your maps within 7 to 10 days and upload that data within 7 to 10 days. They're moving forward on the mapping. We're just waiting for that information. It's going to get a little cumbersome probably during the holidays, which I'll talk about in a minute. So basically what we said was if we're still working on the mapping, and you had quite a lengthy agenda today, we sent off the state planning extension request for your due date. The Planning Commission fully supported an extension for 6 months at the last meeting. That was sent in October 29th, and we've requested additional 6 months that would put us to July 23rd. Our actual state deadline is January 31st. Last mark for adoption as far as July 23rd with our extension that we all supported. Just on kind of the timing of the schedule. So in the interim, while we're still writing, we have to extract that data, which is required for mapping. It tells you parcels or what type of land use, how many parcels or what type of zoning. We thought the next meeting then go through the entire public comment process. So if the Planning Commission has a December 11th meeting, we would like to go over the CDP internal review comment process for the commissioners and then the external review comment process. We just finished this process in 2 municipalities. Because of COVID, our outreach and our comments receiving back had to be a little bit more clear what we had to offer the public to be able to do comments. And I'd like to show you the deliverables from that now, which would be great because we just finished those. State planning really liked the format that we used, how everybody's comment was counted. I know this commission is very interested in ensuring that everybody gets to see the draft document, everybody has time, and every response is actually calculated and reviewed. And then we'd like to go over the proposed release schedule. We would like to get a defined release schedule, and we should know more by your December 11th meeting, depending on the mapping situation, because we can't speak in turn for the state and the county's turnaround time. But we'd like to do that at the December 11th meeting. So we would get your input before this is started to see if you like the process, see if you want some changes, see if you like the format and what works on your end. So I think that's a great meeting to go over what our next step is once you get the document. And with that, we kept it brief to where we were and where we're at today and where we're moving forward. Questions, concerns?
Debbie,
Yes.
It looks like the December regular meeting, we will be spending some time talking about the review process.
I would say at least a half an hour to 45 minutes.
And is there also a possibility that we would be looking at for the imminent release of the CDP for the review, possibly in December, shortly after the meeting? Or is that an impossibility right now?
We can't schedule that until the mapping is completed.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're on hold. So we would love to release the schedule to where the Planning Commission knows we know our workload for sure. But at this time, I should know more next week on when the city will be done with the information needed for the mapping,
Mm-hmm.
which they'd like to take, and then submit it to the county. My concern, once again, is the timing of when we're releasing it to the county. I mean, the week after next is Thanksgiving, and then we have December holidays. So you end up honestly turning around, there's probably 15 work days for government employees from big time. So I do know they're hiring a new person in the county, but they're actually doing a lot of the legwork for us, in our first conversation. So I'd like to get it as fine-tuned as we can. If not, I know, Jeff, you and I have talked about if there's chapters I could release that would not have a lot to do with land use or the zoning categories that we have to pull in. So for the land use goes into commercial, it goes into, so I think I'd like to have a meeting with you and Brian. We do weekly, or monthly, to talk about what we want to release or what we can and if it'll be of value.
Yeah, I'd like to, I'd like for us to meet in about 2 weeks.
That'd be great, because then I'll know some timing numbers.
Yeah, because right now, I think it's still a possibility that it could be released in December, although that's not a promise. That's just
right.
Measuring the pace so far. We are on track for what we expected.
Right.
But you know, when we get, obviously, it's going to be pretty impossible to have a special meeting in later December. So it would just be good for everyone to have an expectation.
Jeff, there's
a regular December meeting.
There's a lot of content in the CDP that is qualitative and not quantitatively driven by the mapping that Debbie's talking about. And I think if we could start to see that, that would be beneficial, and then ultimately it blends into the quantitative part of it. So if that could be released earlier, that would be sort of a leg up, because it's independent of the quantitative aspects.
It's actually part of each chapter title. So we could look at the vice president and the president, or the chair and the vice chair, and I could look at it, but there's probably 2 chapters that have no quantitative data, but then commercial has quantitative data to make results and goals. Housing has quantitative data, environmental has quantitative data, and that all gets pulled in outside of land use too. Makes it a little more interesting when you read the tail end of that quantitative data, when you make mixed use decisions, et cetera. So I think we can look in the chapters we can release. We're more than willing to be able to do that. It might not need a meeting either. So what may happen is, because this first release is internal for the planning commission to redline. So one approach, which I could discuss with the chair and the vice chair, would be that the next December meeting, we go through the comment process and see if everybody likes that, and the public process. And then if we have 3 or 4 chapters that we can send out, send those out via email to the planning commissioners. Not need a meeting, because we're not really revealing, we're asking for your input at the time. Might be an option to have you start reading during the holidays.
I have a question, if I could.
Yes.
So it looks like you'll be releasing things, you know, not all at once, but you'll release some different times. Would it be better for you, Debbie, if we give you comments internally on each of these things, or would it be better if we wait till the end to give you comments?
I actually, that's a really good question, because the document flows. When you chop it up into one document, you might read, like, let's say you read chapter 1 and 2. You might read 4, 5, and 6 and go back and want to change something in 1 and 2, and we just doubled our review time. So in our scope, which I really have to, we've been very generous, I think, and in our scope, we have 1 revision for the planning commission and 1 revision for the public that we do in lump sum. So if we start piecing it in and then going back again, I just want to talk to the, you know, the meetings with the president, the vice president really help to say, here's the pros and cons. Do you want to reach out to the rest of the commission? What do you think? We 100% recommend the document getting released collectively as 1 full draft. If we have time until probably, we'd like to give the public probably March timeframe, February, because a document in July would be giving it 3 to 4 months out for the public during the spring. But I need to go through that schedule to backdate what the law is going to say for adoption. We have to backdate from July. So we prefer to do the whole document from the beginning to the end. If we need to change the scope, can't change the schedule because it's state mandated. We can change, if we need to change the scope, we look at how many iterations, because the planning commission sees it 1 time. Then we do the modifications depending on the level of comments we receive. And then we submit it out to the public, and then we get their comments back, and the planning commission gets to see all the public's comments. That's the scope, but I think it's something we need to talk about, probably where we're at in the process, and based on timing, what we can release. I don't know if that really answered it, but I think we need to consider all options. Conversation in 2 weeks.
It did. I want to see the progress on the mapping, because I think we agree that that doesn't have to be 100%, but it has to be substantially finished. And let's see where we are in a few weeks, and then we'll know in December. We'll definitely cover the review process. And yes. I mean, I would still like to get the document out. I would rather get everything out at once than piecemeal, but if we have to look at that, let's do it in December.
Okay. Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Debbie. We appreciate you. I'm sorry I didn't send you a reminder. That's my bad.
Just see what happens when we miss a week.
Right.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to new business. And we have a partitioning application. So I'm looking online. Yes, we do have the people we need. So I want to just do a little bit of preview for the first one, which is partitioning application number 1020-05 for 54 and 56 Rehoboth Avenue. Just a little bit of background. These folks came to the Planning Commission for a concept review. And we did this at the June 12th, 2020 regular meeting. And in October, we reviewed the letter that the Planning Commission chair sent to the Board of Adjustments in support of the variances that were necessary for this to happen. Those variances have been granted for a number of reasons. One being that along Rehoboth Avenue, many other properties have been treated in the same manner historically. So the motion at the June 12th meeting was to authorize the chair to send written correspondence to the Board of Adjustment in support of variances to allow for this partitioning. And in the alternative, or in addition, the chair is also authorized to appear before the board at his discretion, which he did. So I just want everyone to be clear that the concept review was a concept review. It does not foreshadow what we're going to do at this point in time. This is now the regular process, a preliminary review. And at the preliminary review, I just want to read a few sections from the code. Section 236-81, procedures for consideration of an application. So for a preliminary review, the purpose of the preliminary review is for the Planning Commission to determine if the application is substantially complete and accurate as submitted so as to warrant further consideration. To receive preliminary input from adjoining property owners and the public. And that's the reason why the notification that Ann talked about earlier is so important, that the neighbors know what's proposed and what's happening. And in the case of an application, if we determine it to be substantially complete and accurate, to determine whether any other information is needed or there are legal or factual issues that need any further clarification. So that's basically it. If we decide that it's complete and it's ready, we will make a motion to advance to the public hearing. So check the note. Okay, so the order in which I think we should do this is we should hear from the applicant. I'm looking at the screen. I don't see. Oh, I do see Matt. Thank you. Then we'll hear from the building inspector. The Planning Commission will have questions. And then I don't believe we have any members of the public, but we'll go to the public to see if there's any questions. So everybody good with the process and clear?
Yes.
Great. So let's go to the applicants. Thank you.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mackenzie P. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Tunnel and Razor. I am here with Costa Takalis as well as Fairnaghi Takalis. They are next to me on both sides if you have any questions. We are before you today requesting a preliminary review of this partitioning application number 1020-05 for the property located at 54 Unit A and 56 Unit L Rehoboth Avenue, consisting of Lot 20 Rehoboth Avenue into two lots, with an easterly portion of Lot 20 becoming one lot of 2,044 square feet, and the westerly portion of Lot 20 becoming one lot of 2,956 square feet. Included in the applicant's submissions are exhibits A through H, and I'll briefly review what each of those exhibits are. So exhibit A includes the property information cards and deeds for lot number 20. As you may have noticed, the parcel identified as parcel number 334-14.18-31.01 is owned by 20 Rehoboth Avenue LLC. The improvements located on the parcel identified as parcel number 334-14.18-31.01-L are also owned by that entity, and that is the location of Sensations. The improvements located on the parcel identified as parcel number 334-14.18-31.01A are owned by the late Harry Sakalis and Robin Hood Restaurant. And the Robin Hood improvements were left to Berenice Sakalis after Mr. Sakalis's passing. Exhibit B includes aerial and street frontage images. Exhibit C includes the existing and proposed condition surveys. Exhibit D is the Planning Commission affidavit executed by the member owners of 20 Rehoboth Avenue LLC, including Mr. John Howard Legg, Ms. Carol Legg Smar, Ms. Iva Louise Legg, and Mr. Jason B. Hill. Exhibit E is a copy of the 20 Rehoboth Avenue LLC operating agreement and LLC interest transfer agreement, memorializing the interest transfer from the late Willard T. Hill and Hetty A. Hill to their 4 children previously mentioned, John Legg, Carol Smar, Iva Legg, and Bo Hill, as equal 25% interest holders in the LLC. Exhibit F is a copy of the late Willard T. Hill's last will and testament. Article 3B and Article 4 confirm that the children, their children inherited their father's property, and this property owned by 20 Rehoboth Avenue LLC. Exhibit G is a copy of Robin Hood's business license. And finally, Exhibit H is a copy of the tax map. There is some relevant land use history associated with this application. The applicant did appear, as previously mentioned, before this commission on June 12th for a concept plan review regarding this application. And during that concept plan review, this commission voted to authorize the chair to send written correspondence to the Board of Adjustment in support of the variances to allow for the partitioning. The commissioners' vote, however, did not preview how the Board of Adjustment or Planning and Zoning Commission will vote on this application, or that application for that matter. Rather, the commission's vote just indicated that there were variances required to partition lot number 20. As the building inspector report stated, the applicant did appear before the board on September 28, 2020, seeking 6 variances from Code Section 270-22, minimum lot dimensions for the proposed parcel A and B, and those variances were granted. The granted variances permit each proposed new lot in shape and size to have a street frontage of less than the required 50 feet, an area of less than 5,000 square feet, and disallowed the requirement that the lots created must be able to contain in them a 4,000 square feet rectangle. The applicant is before you today, as previously mentioned, to determine if the application is substantially complete and accurate so as to warrant further consideration, to get preliminary input from the neighbors and the public, to determine if the subdivision qualifies as a partitioning or minor subdivision. As previously stated, this would be for a partition, and to determine whether additional information is needed from the applicant and whether legal or factual issues need clarification. I'll briefly explain Robin Hood's motivation, and then I'll get to any questions that you may have. Robin Hood has operated in Rehoboth for decades, since 1968. With rental increases in Rehoboth, it can be very difficult to maintain a presence, as many of you are aware. An opportunity has presented itself for ownership of the land where Robin Hood exists. Our client has always had a remarkable relationship with the landlord, and an opportunity to purchase the roughly 2,000 square foot portion of Lot 20 has presented itself to unify the improvements of Unit A that are already owned by Mrs. Sakalis with the land owned by 20 Rehoboth Avenue LLC. As you can see in the existing conditions survey, there are currently 2 separate buildings on 1 lot. Unit A, shown on the boundary survey again, is Robin Hood, and Unit L is Sensations. The proposed parcel partition changes nothing structurally on the site. However, Robin Hood does plan to make improvements eventually to their building, as it is outdated and does need work completed. Not only are there separate structures, but there are also separate tax map identification numbers. So all that will change is the ownership of the land, in our opinion. To conclude my presentation, I'd also like to draw your attention, as I had before at the concept plan review, to the tax map in Exhibit H. You will notice that partition requests are perhaps more common than you might think, and there are a number of other lots in the city that have historically been partitioned and also that have smaller lot sizes than the proposed partition for each parcel A and B. With that, I will welcome any questions from you, and I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pete. We appreciate that. Anybody have questions?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Bryan.
Ms. Pete, the building inspector's report right above the signature line just contains a sentence that says authorization to allow building encroachments on city property is recommended before a determination is made on this application.
I can speak to that. So we have actually talked about this several times. I've also spoken with Glenn about this point. There was a discussion of whether or not we needed a license agreement with the city and also the adjacent landowners. There was a minor encroachment as well onto Blackwell Hitch's their property. However, we had discussed that may not be required. However, if the commission considers that be necessary, we can get some license agreement executed. And I can also let Glenn speak to that point if necessary, but that has been the discussion so far.
Yeah, my conversation with Ms. Pete is exactly as she indicates. It's traditionally been the practice of the Planning Commission to only not go forward with the partitioning if that partitioning would create a new nonconformity, so a new encroachment of some way. And this partitioning does not propose scenario. The other conversation we had is that these are very minor encroachments into the sidewalk area, partly because of the material used to finish the building, and there's an intention to do some renovations going forward. So it might not be necessary in any event to have that license agreement. So I don't think it's necessary that the Planning Commission deal with this issue. It's a license that would be granted by the city commissioners if it ever needed to be. But again, this doesn't present a scenario that would prohibit you from moving forward with the partitioning.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Other questions?
I had a question.
Okay, Lee.
Is this the final approval? Because there's been talk about a conceptual approval and preliminary.
No, so we previously were before you for a concept plan review, and now today we're here for preliminary review, and then subject to determining whether the application is substantially complete, we will then be scheduled for the final hearing for the partition.
Exactly. So, okay, Mr. Strange.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm going to be voting in favor of this. But in saying that, I think it's appropriate to point out that with this rather unusual application, that future applications may not be reviewed favorably, because this really is being done for the benefit of the entire town. And there's no way to know if future applications will end up benefiting the town and may only be for the pecuniary gain of the applicant. But this one, I think, represents the best of doing separations, and so I'm going to be voting in favor of it.
Thank you for those comments. Mr. Patterson, you're muted.
Yes, I am. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, just a question about completeness. So I know from having watched the Board of Adjustment meeting that they did grant the variances, as you say, but our application indicates in item letter I, number 1, that I think the building inspector is supposed to provide all the documentation of that, and I don't think it's in the record yet. Some sort of a report attesting that the variances which were sought have been granted.
I'm not sure if the report submitted, I know that the report submitted by Mr. Molina did reference the specific variances granted. However, I'm sure that we could submit a record of the variances granted into the record. If someone else would like to speak to that point, they may.
Yeah, maybe you could just supplement that with a copy of the, in our instructions or in our form, it says a copy of any rulings.
Great. Okay.
So it's all in one record.
Do you know if has issued the written opinion yet or the written decision yet, Mackenzie?
I actually don't think we've received the final, and I don't believe we've received that.
Okay.
Glenn, I'll have to check on that. I did receive some decisions from the Board of Adjustment, but I'm not sure if they're in yet for this particular case,
Okay.
but I'll check.
Then I think it's at the commission's discretion to decide whether this item on the application has been met or not. You have the building inspector's report that does mention that the variances were approved for the 3 items that Ms. Pete mentioned. And I was present at Board of Adjustment meeting, so for what it's worth, I can represent that those variances were granted.
Yeah, Mr. Kaufman?
Well, in light of what the commissioners did yesterday and the clear space case in terms of having everything in the record before we take action, I think that maybe what we ought to do here is, if we approve this, is add a condition that it come in subsequent, but that we've noted it's been done. I really don't want to be inconsistent with what the commissioner said yesterday in terms of all these applications.
If I may add, in the building inspector's report that was submitted and drafted on October 28th, as previously mentioned, there is a reference made for the prior approval that addresses the code section where each variance was sought and notes the specific the 6 in total variances that were sought. So I'm not sure that there would be an inconsistency. However, we certainly could condition that and get the commission that information.
Well, it needs to be substantially complete, and it's substantially complete except for that. So I don't think anything needs to be noted separately.
Yeah, and our action today is to simply agree that it's suitable to move forward for a public hearing, which would be a month from today. And I think all parties are in agreement that it has been done, although the paperwork may not be complete. It will be complete before the time of the hearing. That's a good point, though, Steve. Thanks for bringing it up.
Right.
Okay, so I think we should bring in, there's no other questions for Ms. Pete. Why don't we bring in the building inspector? Mr. Janis, are you able to join us?
We are here, but Mr. Molina is going to speak to this.
Oh, Mr. Molina, there you go. I'm so used to seeing your name on there. I'm sorry.
How you doing?
Okay.
How you doing, everyone? Just for brevity, I would like to ask your permission if I could stipulate to the facts that Ms. Mackenzie Pete's presented to the commission. Otherwise, the report will reiterate practically everything that she has commented on. I have not received a copy of the decision from the Board of Adjustment, but I can attest, since I was at the hearing, put it in writing, that the 6 variances, 3 for each of the lots, were granted by the Board of Adjustment on September 28th, 2020.
And Mr. Molina, do you want to say anything to Mr. Bryan's question earlier? Did you hear it?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes, I did. As to the issue of the documentation for the decision of the planning from the Board of Adjustment, that was not available. I was there at the hearing. I basically was assisting the city. Since I'm not an attorney, I can't represent them. But I was performing my duty as the building inspector. And at that Board of Adjustment hearing, The board granted the variances to allow the creation of each new lot in shape and size to have a street frontage of less than the required 50 feet, an area less than 5,000 square feet, and disallow the lots containing within it a rectangle of at least 4,000 square feet with a shorter side measuring at least 48 feet.
But, you know, I think I misspoke there. I'm sorry. I meant the question about the lot lines. The
newly created lot lines. Is that the questions?
The question about the lot line on each side being an inch or so different. Mr. Bryan, do you want to rescue me?
The encroachments, Dom.
The encroachment.
On the encroachment, yes, I can speak about that. If you actually have to turn your surveys upside down because the arrow is pointing north, if that will be helpful. The eastern portion of lot number 20 becoming parcel A, consisting of 2,044 square feet with a 100-foot easterly side lot line, a 100 feet westerly side lot line, and a 20.44 feet northerly front lot line, and a 20.44 feet southerly rear lot line. The east side of the building wall is 0.3 inches over. The gutter is 0.9 feet over. The HVAC duct is 0.26 feet over on lot number 18. The front side building wall is 0.7 inches over on city sidewalk. On the western portion of lot number 20, becoming parcel B, consisting of 2,956 square feet with a 100-foot westerly side lot line and a 100 feet easterly side lot line and a 29.56 feet northerly front lot line and a 29.56 rear lot line. On the west side, you had the neighbor's eaves encroachment of 1.2 feet over and the front side building wall 0.4 feet over on city sidewalk.
And so those are the encroachments that we all agree do not require adjustment at this time that Mr. Mandel has talked about?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay.
Okay. So I don't see any members of the public here that we can go to for questions. One of the things that I did was draft a motion, but I haven't been able to distribute it. I didn't start drafting it early enough. So I will tell you what the motion looks like, and someone who wants to make it can make it if we're ready to take the action. So on your agenda, you have the description, which starts with preliminary review. A motion would look like, I move that, and then that whole paragraph. And then after a comma, it would say, is determined to be substantially complete and accurate in accordance with applicable provisions of Chapter 236 of the City Code, and shall be placed on the agenda at a subsequent meeting for a public hearing on said application and action by the Planning Commission.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Strange. Is there a second?
Second, Mike Bryan.
Okay, we have a second. Okay, let's take the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. This is eligible for the public hearing. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that takes us to letter B. And letter B is partitioning application number 0920-04. And it's for the property located at 46 Columbia Avenue. So what I said before about what the review process looks like is the same. And if it's okay, we can go to Mr. Becker. Okay, thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you very much. Just start out, make sure that my speaker's on. Am I heard?
You're good.
Great. Thank you very much. Members of the Planning Commission, Mr. Mandalis, ladies and gentlemen of the public, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jay Becker, and I'm a partner with the law firm Hudson Jones, Jarrick and Fisher. I'm here with my associate, Joel Collins, who is across the room, approximately 6 feet away from me. We're here on behalf of Maruti Seth and Gagan Seth, two brothers who are the co-owners of the property known as 46 Columbia Avenue, which lies on the southerly side of the second ocean block of Baltimore Avenue within the boundaries of the city of Rehoboth Beach. For the record, that is identified by Sussex County Tax Map and Parcel Number 3-34-14.13-136. Mr. Seth was unable to log in, but he is here on my speakerphone, and he can comment if so requested. This is Maruti Seth, by the way. He was the spokesman of the brothers. I'd like to begin today, I guess, first by congratulating the newly elected members. Congratulations. And thanking all of you, by the way, for serving. I'd also like to thank the commission for holding the hearing today. Again, we're still in the midst of this pandemic, and I certainly appreciate you taking the initiative to do the work to make these things happen. I know they're not easy. There's a lot of moving parts. So thank you very much. I think the only person who looks forward to having these things in person in the future is probably Ann. And it's coming one day, I'm sure. We are here today to seek the commission's finding that our application for our lot partition is substantially complete under the code of the city of Rehoboth Beach, and to request your permission to proceed to a public hearing. Pursuant to that task, I'd like to draw your attention, if I may, to our application. The subject lot itself consists of subject parcel, I should say, consists of a 120-foot by 150-foot rectangular parcel, again, on the southerly side of Columbia Avenue. The parcel itself consists of two plotted 50-foot by 100-foot lots, being lot R and S, and the westerly one half of lot T, which itself is 25 feet by 100 feet in dimension. All these lots are in the Seaview Park subdivision of Rehoboth Beach. The parcel is improved by a single-family residence with a garage apartment, with the corresponding curb cut for its driveway onto Columbia Avenue. As the house currently sits, it does not, in fact, meet current setbacks that would be required if built new for either the front, back, or side yards, and actually as a garage apartment too. So it's an all-around non-conforming structure under the current code. While the nature of our property would qualify us to seek an administrative quote over-the-counter partition under the code, such an administrative partition would result in the lot being subdivided between lots S and R, with the resulting 75-foot by 100-foot lot being the westerly one half of lot T and S, and comprising 7,500 square feet, by the way, in area, as well as a 50-foot by 100-foot lot being lot R, which would comprise itself of 5,000 square feet in area. We're here today because we're seeking permission to move the boundary line between the two partition lots, if granted, so that the resulting lots would be equally divided into two 62.5 foot by 100 foot lots, each comprising 6,250 square feet in area. We believe our request result in the least disruption to the current neighborhood, as they would comprise two, if you will, medium-sized building lots, as opposed to one, if you will, regular-sized building lot, i.e. 50 by 100, and one oversized lot, i.e. 75 by 100. The two similar lots would be more congruous in appearance, and we believe would not be detrimental to the overall streetscape of Columbia. We feel there's also some benefit in our two medium-sized lot proposal over the administrative option in the resulting side yard setbacks. 6,250 square foot lot requires a 20-foot aggregate side yard setback. Just for reference, a 5,000 square foot lot would require a 16-foot aggregate side yard setback, and a 7,500 square foot lot would require a 24-foot aggregate side yard setback. While the net setback, I guess, between all the properties is the same, we believe it's beneficial to the streetscape to have them equalized between the two lots. In addition, there are large trees on Lot R, which would be on the 50-foot lot size if we followed the administrative separation or partition. It's our desire to save as many trees as possible, and if not all of them, which we think we might be able to do, by the way. Certainly catch a root on excavation, that'd be a different answer. But our plan right now is to save them all. If we abide to the configuration allowable under the administrative option, the 50-foot and 75-foot lots, respectively, the lesser permissible setback on lot R, which again is the 50-foot option, 50-foot by 100-foot, would make our goal of saving trees a lot more difficult. There would be less setback space available or buildable space for trees to remain. It's worthwhile pointing out that at this point, lot coverage and FAR are moot, as the condition for our approval would require removal of all structures currently existing on our property, i.e. the house, the garage, apartment, along with, unfortunately, some asbestos, which will have to be remediated. My clients understand that any future construction on the partition lots, if approved, would have to comply with those requirements and would have to be in full consultation and only according to the permits issued to them by the building inspector's office. In closing, to make it quick, we hope that the Planning Commission will find in preparing our application, we've met our obligation to prepare a substantially complete record. And we respectfully request that you approve us to go forward to a public hearing on our submission. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. We appreciate that. Do we want to ask questions now or go to the building inspector? Anybody have a question for the applicant? Okay, let's go
I
to
have
the
one
building.
question.
Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, just again, looking at our application, you have checked yes on a number of questions going to the issue of changing the grading on the site and excavation and height and elevations of the grade. So I was just curious, could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I'm happy to.
Go ahead.
I'm happy to, Mr. Patterson. Can you perhaps guide me to which one you're referring to, sir?
So in the application, pages aren't numbered, but it's letter G, number 1. And
very good, sir.
Principally number 1.
All right, thank you. So the question, just to read it real quickly, is will any land on the existing lot or any new lot be created, be excavated or increased in height, or the elevations, grading, or drainage otherwise be changed, and if so, explain. Because our application requires the removal of the existing structure, by virtue of that, and we're referring to a blank lot, it certainly would affect excavation and everything else. So that's what I'm referring to. It's just the nature of the application.
Okay. Do you know, is there a basement or any underground structure?
I don't know, but I bet my client does. Marudi, is there an underground structure?
Yes, there is a basement, but that's it.
There is a basement, sir. I don't know if you can hear him or not. I apologize.
No, I heard it. I heard it. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Other questions?
Well, I assume there'll be a basement in both of the new homes that they're built. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, sir?
I assume there'll be a basement in both of the new homes that they're built. Is that correct?
I don't know if plans have been finalized at this point, sir. I think that they've looked at some stuff, but I don't believe it's been planned. Already, have the plans been finalized for that?
No, not even close. But there is a good chance we will have basement.
Okay. Again, I don't know if you hear that. What my client said is plans are not even close to being finalized at all, but there's a good possibility that they'll look at basement to answer your question.
I did hear it.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to Mr. Molina now.
Okay, this is a preliminary hearing for petitioner request number 0920-04. I want to stipulate to the facts all the information that Mr. Becker presented. But the planning commission should give notice to the trees, which is on the last page. And without the recommendation from the arborist at this point, I believe that in parcel B, there may be an opportunity of having no trees removed, even though the client has not indicated that they don't plan to remove only tree by shifting the side yard to the left. If you look at parcel B, the proposed parcel B, there's in the building line to the right, if one side says 6 foot, it may reduce the chances of any trees being removed.
And if I may interject real quickly to Mr. Molina's point, that's a good part of the reason for our consideration, because if we were left with the administrative option, that lot would be the 50-foot lot, which would then significantly build in or bump into any buildable space. So that actually is part of our issue. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, Mr. Molina?
No, that's it. I just want to bring that to the attention of the Planning Commission.
Okay, so back to the Planning Commission. Do we have questions for either Mr. Becker or Mr. Molina? Mr. Kaufman, did I see you raise your hand?
No, I was just looking at the survey plat, and I do see the trees.
Okay, great. Okay, Mr. Strange.
Yeah, I would just like to make the observation to Mr. Becker and his client that it's nice to see a subdivision of a lot that takes into account doing it in a way that's beneficial to the city and the property owners as well, instead of just wreaking havoc, which we've seen in some other applications.
Thank you, sir.
Well then, if there are no other questions, I think it's time to determine if we think the application is substantially complete. So repeating my earlier effort, the motion will look like this. I move that, and then paragraph B on the agenda is determined to be substantially complete and accurate in accordance with applicable provisions of Chapter 236 of the City Code, and shall be placed on the agenda at a subsequent meeting for a public hearing on said application and action by the Planning Commission. Who wants to claim it?
I'll move it.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Wonderful. So we have it moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against or abstentions? Okay, the motion moves. This is forwarded for a public hearing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Becker.
Thank you for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks. We're doing really well today, time-wise. I'm very pleased. So the next item is letter C, discussion of 5G wireless technology infrastructure. Mr. Strange is going to lead this part of the discussion. I wanted to preface it by saying that there was sort of there's kind of a last minute thing going on here, in that the Board of Commissioners has been working on this issue for a while. And at their recent November 9th workshop meeting, they were aware that we were going to have a discussion, but they were ready to take action on city manager recommendations. They put that off in with respect to us, so that our content of immediate concern to these specific city manager recommendations could be considered by them. And they did give us a rather aggressive response time. They would like it by the end of the month, so that it could be scheduled at the workshop meeting of December 7th. They were generous to if that's not possible, to allow us to consider consider it at our December meeting and then get back to them immediately thereafter. But I'd like for us to listen to Mr. Strange, his presentation. He's identified just 2 recommendations that this is pertinent to. And if we can take an action to dispose of the immediate need, that would be a good thing, but we don't have to do it that way. Great. If you'd like to start, Mike.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I guess I would start by asking one thing: did everyone have a chance to review the little 5-page? I think it was 5 pages that I wrote and was distributed with regard to 5G and some history. Is it an affirmative, or did no one look at it at all? Okay, right.
I looked at it.
Okay, it was. Jeff luckily gave me some input on it, and I really wanted to try to make a broad swath to try to bring us up to speed on this, because it is infrastructure, and there's historical precedence that shows that. And I only gave one example, which was I thought probably more intuitively obvious, where a rush to judgment on things that look good ultimately end up being disastrous. And interestingly enough, this concept of 5G, whether it's 5G, 6G, 4G, et cetera, the generational, is having a big impact right now on the urban landscape. It's accelerated over the last really 5 years and gone into sort of hyperdrive in the last couple. And in a few instances, the result on the urban landscape has been really horrendous. And so you have to trade off what we do for society, what's important for the large scale versus what happens on the small scale, which is in our communities and towns from an urban planning standpoint. The report and order that I refer to and is frequently thrown up to municipalities by the various industry players from 2018 was a major change in perspective by the Federal Communications Commission. And there were 3 very important rules, and that were, well, there's a 120-page if you read the entire document, which is basically, you get tired of reading it because it's 120 pages of administrivia and legal jargon. And the bottom line was the report and order applied what's called the materially inhibits concept to non-fee requirements. And there are 3 that relate to what we do on the Planning Commission and to any municipality in general, in that with regard to restrictions. And these restrictions are not preempted. I want to repeat that, not preempted if they are reasonable. It's a very interesting discussion of what's reasonable or not, but no more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure deployments. Very important characteristic. And the third is that they're objective and published in advance. Now, the Ninth Circuit, which I referred to in August, struck down the fact that they had to be objective. That's not a negative. What they did is they ordered the FCC to go back and look at that, and they found that requiring it to be objective was arbitrary and capricious because legitimate aesthetic requirements were not always preempted just because they were more burdensome. That is a critical aspect for us that do planning in the urban planning world and for the PC as commissioners, because that particular requirement that was set in place by the FCC was really exemplary of a totally technocratic engineering analysis with absolutely throughout 100, actually more than 100 years of established knowledge and science with regard to the use of land. And that was something that the FCC they have not issued a new edict yet on that. I'm sure it will come down. But it's something that's extremely important for us on the Planning Commission, because development is expressed, that which we experience in our everyday lives in the urban environment is through an interrelated dimensions of spatial networks and geometries and social and cultural, political, psychological, economic and environmental factors. So it's this whole thing that becomes what is us, what is our city. And if one thinks for a moment about very diverse places, for example, let's take Rehoboth Beach and then compare it to Carmel by the Sea in California, or Williamsburg, Virginia, or Sarasota, Florida, or Provincetown, Massachusetts. These are very, very different manifestations of communities that don't look alike, don't act alike, aren't the same. And the people that live there will each tell you how glorious and wonderful their town and community is, mostly. The same thing for us, and yet we're very different in those other communities. So the nature of 5G is very, very different than the infrastructures that have been put in place in the past. And even though people complain about power poles and where they're located and cables and the telephone companies' wires and Comcast wires, etc., they have been integrated into the community where they've become commonplace. And there really hasn't been a heck of a lot of change in the last really 70 years in local communities, the biggest exception being the move towards underground utilities. However, with the FCC ruling, having your utilities underground is not a sufficient reason to prevent 5G, which are vertical above ground installations, from going in. That in itself creates some problems, and I think it may go back and bounce around a bit because, in fact, you can put 4G, 5G, 6G installations in a community that has all the utilities underground, and you can do it with structures that look just like a mailbox, not much higher. But in order to do that, it requires a tremendous amount of expense by the utility, and well, that's too bad, because it still is not burdensome and it takes into account things that would be applied to other types of infrastructure.
Mike,
Yes.
sorry, but I don't know if we can have folks mute. There's some noise in the background, and so you're becoming choppy. It's hard to hear you 100%. Oh, there you go. It cleared up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, because there's no noise on my end except me talking.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Is it okay now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now, I would like to just ask one thing because I didn't mention it in my report, but I wanted to get some sense of the background or experience. Does anyone know what OTMR stands for?
No.
Okay. It's One Touch Make Ready, and it's actually a crucial component with regard to utilities. And it really became more important after the 1996 breakup of AT&T and the Bell companies. And OTMR stands for One Touch Make Ready, and that relates to all the administrivia, and boy, is there a ton of it, related to how a utility, Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, or one of the other 45 major service providers of telecommunications, attaches to a pole. There are all sorts of rules and regulations of what you can and can't do. And it turns out in the report and order from 2018, the FCC significantly reduced the administrative burden on people that want to attach things onto the poles. Now, the poles typically in our area are owned by Delmarva Power, but that's not necessarily the case in other areas. The poles can be owned by Verizon, they can be owned by AT&T, they can be owned by the local power company, local utility. And after the breakup in 1996, there's a whole bunch of fruit salad definitions, but there's things known as ILECs, CLECs, which are incumbent local exchange carriers and competitive local exchange carriers. And all of this results in who talks to who and when it gets done and how you coordinate for putting stuff on a pole. It becomes extremely, extremely important, particularly in light of the Environmental Committee of Rehoboth Beach came up with a whole series of proposals for that they wanted to have implemented with regard to the decisions that were going to be made by the commissioners. And 90% of them essentially were rejected by the city manager in consultation with Glenn and with the Cohen Law Group, and by input from both AT&T and Verizon. Now, I would say, and first of all, I think most people know my background, but I have 2 degrees in engineering and my PhD is in urban planning, but I also am a licensed FCC technician and have about 45 years worth of experience in telecommunications. Most people, the commissioners, most people within the city don't have a background in that area and really get somewhat overloaded with the material that's presented by Verizon and AT&T and others, and not really sure knowing what it all means. Now, we've had a specific request that was given to us that Jeff and I received from the mayor with regard to commenting onto the city manager's response to the EC committee and what they are proposing that the commissioners vote on and modify the code for planning purposes. Now, I would preface this by saying that even if we did not have any additional information or specific details for 5G or any other G for that matter, that our existing building and zoning code in concert with our comprehensive development plan provides sufficient definition to deal with issues that might come up. The specificity, however, which is lacking to some degree in the CDP, is nonetheless fully binding and applies to the installations that go in. Now, having said all that, with regard to the city manager's response to the EC committee, previously, that document was reviewed by Glenn, the Cohen Law Group, AT&T, and Bonnie Metz, not to be confused, even though she has the same name as the persons on the environmental committee. Who's the external VP, is the Senior Vice President for External Relations at Verizon, made comments on the environmental committee's proposal. I've reviewed the proposal as well, and I generally agree with the city manager's responses, with the exception of two elements, which I take exception to. One of which is it's in part one. It's element number 9. I have to refer to it, so I can't read that one off the top of my head. Recommendation 9 was to list all feasible alternative site locations and complete description of why proposed site is the best site when compared to each of the alternative sites. The city manager's recommendation, in conjunction with the response provided by Mike Roberts from the Cohen Law Group and in consultation with the city solicitor and staff, was that no action is recommended. In other words, that one's rejected. I disagree with that only to the extent that although they don't have to fully explicate what alternatives might have been placed for infrastructure, I think it's extremely important that it receive the same level of documentation that you would get as if you were doing, to provide some semblance of comparison, as if you were doing a subdivision. We have a whole series of questions that we must answer.
Sorry, if someone could mute, Mike's getting choppy again. There's some background noise. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
It's coming from some other source then?
Yes, I think so. It's
okay.
Cleared up. Go ahead.
Should provide the same level of detail, articulation, drawings, engineering drawings with regard to the installation that's going in. Now, I can't fully explicate beyond that at the moment because we got short notice on this. But essentially, you can't just say you want to do something as a simple one-liner. You have to provide more and far more detailed engineering drawings of where it is, what it is, how it is, and the location where it's placed. And so I would just leave it at that. I would comment that aside from the city documentation, the observations that were made by Ms. Metz from Verizon were overwhelmingly self-serving. And quite frankly, I felt like it was sort of like going to the fox to ask them how that you should guard your chickens. They can't help but say things that are generally for their benefit and really to the disadvantage of the community members. I don't think that may have been their intent, but that's how it ends up from an analysis standpoint.
Hey, Mike, just to interrupt you for a second. The document I have, the city managers, has a part 1 and a part 2.
Yes.
And recommendation 9 is in part 2. Is that what I heard you say? Or is my document wrong?
In mine, I thought it was in part 1. Glenn, is that, did I screw up on that? Is it in part 2 or part 1?
Part 1 has 5 recommendations in what I printed out.
Okay, maybe I got it backwards then. I'm sorry. We got a flurry of documents from Ann and a whole bunch of them, so I may have gotten it backwards. It's EC Recommendation 9, listing all feasible alternative sites and complete descriptions. And the city manager recommendation is no action.
So
So my recommendation is that in a modified form, and I'll provide more documentation in the future as fast as I can at the request, that it needs an articulation that's at least as involved from the physical drawings, engineering drawings, and some nature as what we have, which we just went over with regard to a partitioning request. And I think there's some similarities there that need to be addressed.
So, Mike, did
Yes.
you have a chance to see this response from Joseph Davis at AT&T?
Well, I'm going to get to that one.
Okay. Well, I'd like to understand how you think, this response kind of fits right with the recommendations and the concerns that you have. Because honestly, when I looked at the pictures, and I mean, I have a background from AT&T. I understand, right, how things work from a utility perspective, and I've had to deal with the FCC in my roles. But when I look at the 3 pictures that have been provided, I don't think they look obtrusive or, in my mind, at least the 2 on the left. The third one could be, questionable. But as it relates to what they were trying to do, as Joseph describes, he is trying to fit the small cells in as more alike, right, into the Rehoboth landscape.
Right. He left out the one that doesn't fit.
Okay. Well, I mean, if there are some that don't fit, I think that's obviously a concern. But I mean, there are some that are okay. And
oh yeah, no, I agree.
Right. So we have to kind of think that through.
That's absolutely correct. But you need to have the full documentation in order to know what in fact is happening. One of the things that was objected to by both AT&T and Verizon is they said, gee, well, if we tell you what we're really going to do and we tell you more than what we're just doing for one site, that would, in essence, let other people know what our marketing ideas were, and others could take unfair advantage of it. What's interesting, though, is that in the Title 17 and Section 60 of the Highway Act that Delaware instituted in its legal, let me start over again on that one. The Delaware in 2017 instituted a new law with regard to 5G cells and gave total responsibility in public right-of-ways to DelDOT. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with what's going on in Dewey Beach, but if you look at the installation that was installed at the intersection of Route 1 and New Orleans Street, that is a god-awful, and I don't know how else to describe it, defecation on the environment. It is big, bulky, obtrusive, obnoxious. It's really disgusting. And Dewey Beach has gone ballistic over it. And I don't know if anyone's actually seen that one in Dewey Beach, but it's almost incomprehensible where it's located. It's so bad. However, having said that, I agree with Rachel completely. They all have the rights to install equipment, infrastructure under the law. However, they have to do it according to the 3 rules that are also under the law. And if they go outside that, there's problems. Now, I didn't get into the area of shot clocks, which is an important consideration here. The shot clocks were developed by the FCC that did not take into account the local geophysical differences that occur in communities. And there are a lot of things that literally can't be done in the timeframes that were executed. The town's got thrown under the bus with that rule, and I expect the litigation is going to continue with regard to that. It's interesting to note that the only recourse that a telecommunications company has if a community elects to not accept the application or reject the application is to sue the particular city. Most cities want to avoid being sued. However, there's a benefit to that. If in fact they feel that it's the request that's being made by the telecommunications company is inappropriate, one of the things that it does allow by virtue of deposition and discovery, you in fact can get at the documents to see if in fact what they were doing was based on the science and not just based on BS or economic value to only the particular company. That's a separate issue. So with regard to number 9, the other one in part 2, number 2, I'll refer to that document so I can get it straight. Whoops. Recommendation number 2. Yep, that's part 1. Sorry about that. The quantity, type, and orientation of the antenna planned for, including maximum total planned or complete build out. That's the one that was objected to by Verizon specifically because they didn't want to let people know what their future marketing plans were. Yet under the state law, that's exactly what they're supposed to do if it's feasible. So there's some conflict there with the reality of what's being proposed and what they have to do for the state. Theoretically, everything that Verizon did with the state was submitted under a singular application, and they laid out everything that they were doing with regard to Route 1. I don't know how that played out. I don't have any special information on that, but it seems odd that under the state law, they're required to if it's feasible, yet they're objecting to it for us if it's feasible. Point of contention, it needs to be addressed. One of the difficult things is many of the facts, which were in fact legitimate facts that were presented in the Verizon's response to the city manager's analysis, were true in and of themselves, but didn't really apply. And what I'd like to give just one very good example. Verizon responded when there was a question by the EC committee with regard to home values going down because some of these structures may have been put in places that were not really acceptable. The response was that actually values go up because homeowners right now on a survey basis would rather have better connectivity than they would school systems. So in determining their location and where they're going to live, they're more concerned statistically with whether or not they have good cell service than whether or not the school is the best, which is fascinating, but that's human nature. And if that's where the world is headed, that's where the world is headed. However, although that fact stands on its own merit, it's not really applicable with regard to what is being done right now in Rehoboth Beach. And what I'll say is that when you talk about connectivity, what wasn't referenced by Verizon and Ms. Metz, who made the observation, saying that people want better cell service. Right now, and I'm not even sure if any members on the PC are aware of this, but in Rehoboth Beach, if you have Comcast in your house as a service provider for cable, you probably have a modem and router, and it's probably from Comcast. Every modem router combination in the last 5 years that's been provided by Comcast is partitioned into 2 pieces. One is the local Wi-Fi router local Wi-Fi that provides service from your cell phone if you elect to enable it. And then it goes on their network and then goes to, when you're looking at, for example, doing internet searches on your phone, it goes on their network, even if your phone is from AT&T or Verizon. The other partition that's in those current systems that are in each of your homes is an open Wi-Fi that you may not even be aware of. So if somebody's going down the street and they have an AT&T or Verizon phone or whoever's phone it is, and you have the Wi-Fi enabled, it goes through your house, hops on Comcast, and you get a response back. It's the same, no different than a Wi-Fi hotspot at your local store, restaurant, etc. So it's about competitive advantage. Verizon and AT&T are at a distinct disadvantage for people that come into town or walking down the street, and they really don't want that. The current installations that are going in are more 4G enabled than 5G enabled, and that's really kind of irrelevant. But they have a big impact, and you need to know what's going on. The other thing is, as opposed to the older traditional cell phone apps, or I shouldn't say that, the older and traditional cell phone structures, which were much higher in height, were on much lower frequency bands, and had a much wider footprint. And so you didn't have to install a cell tower every 2 or 3 miles. Depending on the locality and the terrain, they could be every 15 miles. In urban areas, they could be as close as every 1 to 2 miles. It's all the science and the physics, which is what creates part of the problems. In this particular case in Rehoboth Beach, there are roughly 45 to 50 cell providers in this country. And the way the law is currently written, every one of those 45 to 50 cell providers could come to Rehoboth Beach because they want to share in part of the financial pie. Now, just imagine, and as you just pointed out, Rachel, some of these installations that are currently in here are not too obtrusive. And I'm not saying we want to stop all of them. I just want them to be done so that they blend with the urban form. Imagine, instead of just having one pole for the one that was an example in the letter from AT&T, imagine if you had to have 45. And they have to be put every 100 to 1,000 feet based on the frequencies. It's sort of nuts, quite frankly. However, the larger providers, the ones who are the first actors and get in there first, most likely are going to pick up most of the market share. And so it'll be 2, 3, or 4 providers in our city, and not 45 or 50. However, it is technically, legally possible. So what we need to do is to make sure that we have essentially a strong and fair zoning and building code. We already have the CDP, which is extremely valuable because our building and zoning code generally address only things that we know, not the things that we don't know yet. The CDP takes into account things we don't know yet by virtue of applying the generalities of what we would like our community to be. So in the example of the pictures, as you just pointed out, Rachel, that were submitted by Mr. Divis, he gave 3 good examples, and I can't disagree with that. The worst example is the one that's at the end of Stokely Street that was put into the public area on city property that is indivisibly owned by all of us, and it is god-awful ugly. Now, why is that such a lousy installation? When they put other installations on poles, why did they make this one so ugly, and why did they not put it on an existing Delmarva power pole, which was already integrated into the urban environment? I can tell you that it was done because it cost less money. That's why it's where it is. It's not based on science. It's not based on physics. It's not based on anything except financial gain to AT&T. They should have and could have put it on a Delmarva pole. They would have had to pay to put a different pole in the exact same place, and that costs money. That's under the one-touch rules, which was fully capable of doing that. Now, there's a separate issue there, and I can't go into some of it. Glenn's aware of a lot of it. And this was taken up in April, unfortunately, when the coronavirus was raging and the city was otherwise focused. I had just had my heart attack, and quite frankly, I was having great difficulties intellectually and physically and mentally for several months. Finally got things clear. However, the letter from Mr. Divis that he sent in, which we just got minutes ago, literally about 15 minutes before the meeting, there are 7 paragraphs. And it's basically a puff piece. And he starts out with talking about to have a balanced discussion. Well, that's fine. He has the right to his input. But his piece is anything but a logical, scientific presentation. It's basically telling you all the great stuff about AT&T. And in my world, what we do is content analysis to try to determine what the manifest intent is of a particular document. And this one is PR, not based on evidence and science. The first 4 paragraphs are basically more or less correct, but not particularly relevant to the specificity of the discussion that we're having. Paragraph 5 and paragraph 6, and 7. Paragraph 5, and I'll read it. AT&T has deployed small cells in Rehoboth Beach. Their placement was based on precise network engineering analysis and data in order to better serve the customers. For most of the installations, that is true. For one particular installation, that is absolutely, without hesitation, not true. One particular installation was done for the sole purpose of reducing the installation and run rate costs to AT&T. It was not done at all based on a scientific networking engineering analysis, period. The other one, which is paragraph 6, is some AT&T small cells replicated decorative streetlights. Absolutely correct. The one in front of the post office is a very good example of that. Others replaced, or were placed on existing structures. That is not true, because in fact, they did one that wasn't that case at all. The most egregious thing that is I have great difficulty with, based on the science, based on the facts, and based on evidence, not based on my personal opinion. It says these sites were reviewed and approved by the city and installed in full compliance with all relevant regulations, comma. That is a blatantly false statement. And I won't get into any more detail than that. And Glenn is aware of some of these, but I have other additional information that I will share later, but it's inappropriate to discuss that in this forum.
So Mike, are you saying that the city did, I'll just take the first part of that clause. Are you saying that the city did not review and approve?
No, what the city did was review it and approve it, but they weren't given all of the information to make an informed decision. In other words, data was misrepresented to the city. The city can only make decisions on data that's presented to them. But if it's later shown that the data is in fact untrue, that creates a whole nother situation and a different set of circumstances. And there's, there are remedies related when information is presented that the presenter knows is untrue. And I don't think I want to get into more details than that.
Yeah, and I think that's outside of our purview too. So Mike, thank you for that deep dive into the situation. And, you know, as we talked yesterday, this helped, your background helped bring into focus for me what's in our wheelhouse in terms of the land use issue that are involved with these technologies, and where some of your insights might help us with these guidelines. So a lot of people have raised their hands. I think at some point we need to discuss the 2 items that you have problems with. Recommendation 2, I'm generally, the whole big concept plan in the future that might happen and the reasons given for not going with it, I think they're pretty reasonable. Versus, I don't know that we want to touch that one, but we can certainly discuss it. The other one, recommendation 9, and having the example on Stockley Street, and where there's this need for inter-utility cooperation, and they're supposed to work, you know, if a taller pole is needed where an existing pole is to accommodate it, they're supposed to work together, then they're supposed to work together. That's not our problem, and they don't just get to stick another pole in the ground. I think we should think about what our recommendation looks like there. And I'll just open it up for other people to talk.
I'd like to ask 2 questions if I could. Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Mike, I appreciate your presentation. I know it took a lot of time and research on your point of view, but I'm a little confused. I don't exactly know what you want us, if anything, to do. And I also direct this question to Glenn. I'm not sure whether we do or don't have any authority. But what I'm gleaning from what you're saying is, I think you want these companies to have to come before the Planning Commission and, you know, and show what they're going to do so that it's a benefit to the city. I'm not sure we have that authority, number one. That's why I'm asking Glenn. And number 2, I'm not quite sure what you want us as a Planning Commission, if anything, to do. Can you respond to that?
Oh, yeah. It's really related to the CDP, and I really wanted to bring one of the things that Debbie's not here, but when in the original her presentations of the last couple of times was the importance of infrastructure and the importance of having within the CDP. The CDP covers all the things that we don't know today, but to cover the future considerations in terms of the quality of life issues. And it really was to make sure that our CDP addresses, now that we're aware of this, under the infrastructure aspect of it, to make sure it's robust enough and complete enough to do its job, even though we don't know specifically what's going to be happening in the future. So it really is related to consideration for the CDP. I don't want these people coming before the PC. That's not needed. We were requested because of information that I had sent to the commissioners, that the PC consider it in the context of the CDP. So now that we've become aware of this major sort of sea change that's occurring, to make sure that we've got it covered in terms of the generalities of what the CDP is supposed to do. And that really was the intent here.
So essentially, you'd like the CDP to address the concerns you raised in a way that I guess the city and the commissioner and the city manager can address applications in the future. Is that
right? I mean, we have, for example, transportation is a big component in the CDP, and the evolving nature of transportation within the city. Well, this is another aspect of infrastructure that's evolving and is suddenly taking on something that several years ago, I don't think anyone had given any thought about it.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you.
Barry, did I see you raise your hand earlier? You're muted.
You're muted, Barry.
Sorry.
You're muted again.
You're muted again.
Okay, it says unmuted now.
You're good.
You're all right.
Oh, it's okay. I don't know why. Again, I'm still not quite sure, Mike. I do appreciate the education on this because I wasn't aware of a lot of the 5G issues. But if we put this in the CDP, is that just a wish, or does that become a force of law? I don't know how we can overcome federal regulations.
Yeah, I'm struggling with that too.
that bind us, that overtake the federal regulation. It seems to me it's a wish rather than a legal requirement.
No, neither. It's what it is we already know what the federal law is, and everything that we do is within that context. What I'm saying is we want to make sure we don't have any gaping holes now that we've become aware of how this is evolving in our society, that the CDP is the logical place to put things. Just as I gave, and I know may have seemed silly, but it was the idea about the Romans and what they did with their viaducts and aqueducts. Man, they have stood the test of time for 2,000 years. The lead pipes didn't. So it's very similar in our case. The CDP is a document that's supposed to be flexible enough to deal with future issues that we don't know about today. And today we're now learning in the last few years about an emerging technology that's having a dramatic physical impact on our landscape. So it's really to make sure, and it's really probably going to be just a couple sentences somewhere within the component of infrastructure of the CDP, so it makes some sense. It's not attempting to undo anything at the federal level. I think AT&T and Verizon and others have the full right to install things like this. But if in fact they do it, it should be done that it's in and does meet the federal, state, and local requirements. Remember, there are 3 things under the FCC regulations which our code permits us to do. And as long as the code, it permits us to do that, we should do it with the full force of law as it exists.
And also, Mike, I read this morning part of the Ninth Circuit case and some other articles. And you refer to the AT&T poll, I think, on Stokely, and how obnoxious it is and why they didn't put it on an existing poll. But it seems to me what I read is that the city or the municipal jurisdiction can only charge between $300 and $500 for a utility to attach to a pole. it's assumed there that that's not an overburden. But it seems to me that pole they put up is probably cost way more than $300. So from an economic point of view, it seems to me to be cheaper to pay the city or the county the $300 to use an existing pole. And my question would be, why would they spend more to create a new pole unless they thought it was scientifically necessary?
That's a very good example, because by putting it in, and this gets back into the administrivia of one touch, the one touch make ready rules. It actually costs them more to do that on the city property than it would if they replaced the existing pole that was a Delmarva pole on Delmarva right of way. And the reason for it is because of the work that has to then be done, although under the new regs, it could be done by their contractor. The net cost of doing that would actually be greater than doing it where it was done. And it's just pure cost analysis and engineering economy. So it cost them less by doing it this way. Oops.
Brian, do you want to say something?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, thanks again, Mike. I joined the others. This is a really complicated and technical subject, and I don't have a technical mind, so it's helpful to hear it explained. The question I have is, okay, I'm aware we have this federal law, and then we have Delaware state law, including that you mentioned in your note, about reasonable stealth and concealment standards. And I didn't read that state law as imposing any design standards at all, but rather it was saying DelDOT will apply the standards that exist, like, for example, if a city has adopted its own standards. So maybe Dewey hasn't, and maybe that's why they got the result that they did. And so then my question is really about, well, does DelDOT have their own separate design standards for their state roads and right-of-ways? But also, does the city of Rehoboth have standards already? And if so, why aren't we talking about those? Because I know the mayor and commissioners a year ago adopted some ordinance covering some of this area, although again, it's way too complicated nomenclature for me to follow along when we're talking about small cells and non-tower wireless communication facilities and all the different categories of things. Is it 5G? Is it not 5G? I can't tell from reading it, but maybe someone like Glenn could explain. But I guess the question I have is, if we've gone through the trouble of promulgating an ordinance and we can debate, people can criticize whether it's adequate, because, for example, in the letter from, was it Verizon or AT&T that we received today, the picture on the left to me looks like about as good as you can get, right? It's fully integrated into into a column that's serving a dual purpose of being a street light and a wireless column or tower. So that's nice. The other two are not serving that dual purpose, and the other two pictures in his letter, and they're not so fully integrated. They both got a big box hanging on the side of the column, and that's not as attractive as the first picture. But so maybe our existing standards could be better. So my question is really, why the CDP? Why not focus on the existing ordinance and making that better if possible?
Well, I think that's the objective of why the mayor asked us to comment. Maybe it was initiated because of the letter that, or the analysis that I did with regard to the modifications being requested and that the city manager has commented on with regard to redoing our current regs and making some changes. To your point, though, it gets back into the nitty gritty of the details. Is as an example is the manifestation of whether it's 4 or 5, or now they're talking about 6G as well. I mean, it just keeps going in technology, as you would expect, is how you can disguise or camouflage or make it work within the integrated area. I mean, most people accept, if you look at the power poles in and around the city, there are 12,000 volt lines on the top, which is the primary. And then below that is the secondary, which is 120, 240. And there's transformers hanging off of it. And they've sort of grown into the environment. If you go out on Route 1, you'll see high lines. And they've put in newer lines in the last several years, which were a little bit better looking than the older ones. And they're very large, but they tend to integrate into the environment. What we've never dealt with before as a society, although actually we did 100 years ago, what was called the Victorian Internet, when we ended up having teletypes and Morse code and things of that nature. And a whole bunch of wires and a whole bunch of lines went in, and some of them were very ugly, and then they changed them and modified them. And so it happens over time. In this particular case, we were asked to comment on the city manager's response based on the responses when they did the analysis from the Environment Committee. And in my response back to the city and for this committee, I said I agreed with almost all of the city manager's responses, saying that the recommendations are pretty damn good and you should go with them, even though I know the Environment Committee wanted a significant number of other issues. I couldn't, on a scientific basis, support all of them, and on a practical basis. So it was the facts and evidence that I had I was aware of, and I rely on that. There were 2 aspects of it, though, which are the ones I brought up that I questioned, with regard to physical location and how that's approached, and what is presented. And the one that I referred to about, I don't expect Verizon or AT&T to give us their game plan for everything that they're doing, but in the law that was passed by the state, which was the Advanced Wireless Infrastructure Investment Act, Chapter 16, right of access for under public lands managed by DelDOT. It says the installation shall be co-located on existing infrastructure already located in the right-of-way wherever feasible. And the other aspect of it was objective reasonable design standards and stealth concealment requirements. Now, clearly the thing that was done in Dewey Beach, even though Dewey Beach has a comprehensive development plan, there was absolutely no attempt to do that, which was required under the law. Now, the question is, did Verizon present plans that were disingenuous? Did they do it only for their own economic benefit? And did DelDOT really understand the code that they were applying? Because clearly they didn't. And it says design should be performed to minimize the spacing and number of poles. But the other part of it is Section 7, to the extent possible, wireless providers shall plan their installations in a comprehensive manner based on geographic areas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Did Verizon do that? So they're already doing something that the state law says you're supposed to do. In our particular case, I think we should mimic that language and ask them to do similarly. And it says where feasible. From the scientific standpoint, it's very easy to make it feasible. It's all about physics and geometry. Doesn't matter what the hell it is in terms of the RF. So that can be requested. But I go back again to my original comment. Our CDP, particularly with regard to the beachfront, is very explicit as the boardwalk and the beach area being the most valuable aspect of Rehoboth Beach. Our lifeblood is dependent on that. Our businesses are dependent on that. So if you screw it up, that's pretty serious. All I'm saying is that this technology, although all the benefits that in the letter from Mr. Divis says about all the good stuff that it does, there are some real dangerous downsides here that we should be aware of. Our CDP is very important, and all it takes is one. Actually, it's good enough as is, But now that we're aware of this, there may be some fine tuning that's needed. However, that doesn't negate the fact what is going on right now. And so the result of all of this is, as Mike Strange, member of the PC committee, I support the letter that was generated by the city manager, noting the two exceptions where I feel that there is additional work that is needed. I don't reject them as out of hand, but I think some modification is needed to make sure that the residents of Rehoboth Beach are fully protected, and that the telecom providers don't basically get to run free range over everything and trample the rights of the residents. That's it. Boy, I talked a lot. I apologize.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to try a recommendation here. So we have the opportunity to put the information that's important into the CDP, and we have all this background information. So what we need to do in our edits is already well underway. So we're good there. So for this immediate need, where these different discussion points that have been developed and are ready for action by the Board of Commissioners and been suggested by the Environmental Committee, vetted by the city attorney, vetted by the department heads, vetted by the Board of Commissioners already, and the city manager. Why don't we decide what, if anything, we're going to say about these two? And just as an example, if we felt like we wanted to address one of them, I would draw your attention to 9 and recommend that we think about language that that Mike used, where feasible. So right now, it seems to indicate that for every single application, it's required that you have a bunch of alternative site locations and a description of why. That seems like a game to me, because if I knew where I wanted the antenna to be, I would suggest a less desirable. I mean, you could just game this so easy, and it doesn't really appear to have anything. But I do think it makes sense that when antenna are going to go in controversial scenic protection places, like along the boardwalk, I'm sure the Board of Commissioners has spent lots of time on this. The mayor's passionate about this, but we might say that, you know, if the recommended action of 9 is to just discard it and say that no action is recommended, that's fine. But we feel that, you know, there should be some consideration of it would be useful information where feasible for certainly highly scenic places.
So
just to see if anybody likes that opinion or we should move on. I see hands, Rachel and Glenn.
I actually just had maybe a question, more broadly, a question. So at the state level, I'm pretty sure that there is someone that is like a public utility type commissioner, if you will. I mean, is there someone at the state level that we could also go to and get some advice here? Because in the end, they also build those relationships with the utility companies and, you know, have these conversations that we're talking about as it relates to, you know, aesthetics and easements and everything else that goes into, right? Trying to upgrade our communications system across the state. So I wonder if we maybe are just a little bit too inwardly focused, and maybe there are some resources that we can look out to get some advice.
I think that's good help, and I'm glad Glenn raised his hand for the second comment, because I've sat through 2 city commissioner meetings on this in the past year, and the amount of consultant work and advisement and to get us to this point is quite a bit has been done. And I think maybe some of those wells have been drained already. Glenn, if you'd like to say something.
So on that, it's true. We spent a lot of time and a lot of money, frankly, coming up with what the city currently has on the books. And you know, there is a series of design guidelines, but as to the chair's point about you know, focusing on specific areas that are delicate, sensitive, you know, the boardwalk being, of course, our postcard kind of to the rest of the world. You know, so as to those areas, the ordinance already requires that any placements in those areas get special additional treatment by the city manager. It's a personal review by by the city manager that can be, I believe, can be forwarded to the commissioners if she's not comfortable making the decision. That's why on the boardwalk right now, and you saw the pictures, but they're going through a process now. I want to say there's 12 new wireless facilities going on the boardwalk, and we've spent now months. Kevin Williams, the city manager, has spent a long time working with the provider, and the provider has actually gone back to the original manufacturer of those poles the lights are currently on, and that original manufacturer is fabricating a pole that will house most of the wireless communications facilities. The actual mechanics of it will house most of it in the pole. And the poles, I mean, our requirement has been, we want to be able to look down the boardwalk, have all the poles at the same height, all look uniform in nature. So they've been, to the provider's credit, they've been working with us diligently on the boardwalk. Now, that doesn't explain the installation that Mr. Strange has spoken about. That was a different set of circumstances, to say the least. On the two recommendations that Mr. Strange raised, I can comment that when we reviewed them, they didn't create legal difficulties. Both of them are requirements that the city could implement, and it would be legal for us to do so. The question really became on them: what information will we get back, and where would it lead? So on the first one, for example, as to providing all other feasible locations, I agree with the chair that you could end up getting into a game. So one of the options we considered at the time is, rather than the Environment Committee's recommendation exactly as it's written, we would perhaps ask for the provider to give us every feasible installation within, say, a radius of 100 feet, because there are likely other areas that are possible. The provider has, of course, their absolute preferred location, and it might be because of financial reasons or otherwise, but they're, oftentimes their preferred location is based upon how the radio frequencies are going and what is the ideal location to make sure that they have the best coverage in their network. I'm sure there's also a financial component of those decisions. So, but from an aesthetics view, the provider, there may be a couple locations within a 100-mile radius, or within a 100-foot radius that are indifferent to the provider, but from an aesthetics point, that might matter gravely to the city. So I think the city manager would be open to a consideration where we modify that one to say we do want to know other feasible locations within perhaps a 100-foot radius, because that's one of the issues we discussed at the time, and she was not adverse to that type of a recommendation. It just came down to what would we really get back, and we ended up dismissing that one. But if it's one that's important to the Planning Commission, there are alternatives that we've already discussed. The other one, as to part two, recommendation number 2, which is give us a whole, give us your planned network for the city and the locations. What we learned when we looked into that one, and this was a lot from our private consultant, he said, like when infrastructure is hardwired, the utility company has to plan all of it, whether it's pipes or wires. They have to plan that all out for it all to work well together. This technology, he said, is different in that your network evolves as the need evolves. So while they might not need a node today in one particular location in the city, they might find out that, that for some reason, a new restaurant moves closer to it or whatever, and they need a higher coverage in that area. And then they'll recognize that they now need to place a node there. But 6 months ago, they didn't think they needed that node. So our consultant said it would be appropriate and not uncommon for you to say to the provider, please give us everything that you currently have planned. Show us, if it's planned now, we want to see everything that's planned today. But the consultant continued to say, we just have to recognize that it's the type of network that you stamp it in and then you're done and walk away, because it's an evolving network as the need evolves. So I guess on that one, we could, excuse me, I do think that we could say, give us everything that you currently have planned for the city. And I don't think they'd be adverse to doing that. In my discussions with utility providers, they've been pretty open about what they currently have on the books. Although I don't have, the map, but I think that they would provide what they currently have planned. They've all said, we don't know what we're going to need 2 years from now. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Glenn, I actually agree with everything you just said. I would take the minor exception to the last part where when they make their first, that's generally true with regard to the nature of the system now. And it does evolve as the need grows and they can respond to it much more quickly than the quote old days. However, they actually have a pretty good knowledge of where when they put their first node in, as to what the implications are for future development. And so I think it is fair, to, as you just pointed out, to get them to share a little bit more than they otherwise do, but it doesn't create a compromise for their future or marketing plans that someone else is going to observe, because obviously what they share with the city is privately held and not disclosed to anybody else. But it is important in terms of that first placement, because that drives a stake in the ground. And that's very important for when you go from there with the rest of your nodes. The other part is with this, and you're correct, it is evolving, but the very nature of the software, and I don't want to get into all the details, but the software behind it that drives the communications and the nature of the communications and how the communications are handled is exceedingly sophisticated and has to be operated very fast. Not like the old days, once again, which was essentially a network switch system, which was you had a hard wire where you picked up the phone, and when you talked to somebody in California, it was literally a continuous line all the way from one to the other as it was switched in. Now these things are bouncing all over the place, moving between frequencies and protocols and software. Very different situation. However, having said that, we would like things to be able to integrate into the environment in some rational means based on rational planning in the urban environment. And so I would support your proposition and the modification to on those two items. And as I said, I agreed with all the other ones. Just those two stood out because there was a risk of the city being taken advantage of.
Right. Well, I've spoken quite a bit with the city manager, and I think she'd be amenable to those couple suggestions. Yeah.
Mr. Kaufman?
In the interest of time, if nothing else, I'd like to go with the recommendations that Glenn just made on the 2 points. And, I don't know where the others are, but I think they both sounded good. And it sounds like Mike also feels they're okay. So I'd like to do that.
Yeah, so I was going to suggest that after you finished your comments as well. I think that there's value for the PC. We've had an extensive conversation. I think we should let the city manager and the board of commissioners know we considered it. We have some thoughts and a recommendation for them to consider, but we don't, it would be much around the language you used, where feasible, if benefit, to the extent that it's available. And, we get a draft of that going and get it back to them in a one-page format by the end of the month as requested. How do people feel about that general?
Yeah.
Everybody likes that?
I'm fine.
Does anyone feel like we need a vote on that, or are we just in agreement that that's how we're going to respond to a rapid turnaround item that's on the agenda?
I think it's fine.
Maybe there's no harm just taking a quick vote. A motion. So the motion would look something like, well, if anybody's feeling more creative, you can jump in. But we discussed the items. We identified recommendation 2 and 9, and we have the following recommendations for consideration, and they'll be written into the memo what they are.
I'll move that.
Okay. Is there a second? It looks like Joyce and Mike raised their hand. So how about all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you, Mike. That was a dense subject. I'm definitely having a drink after this meeting ends. But thank you for doing that. That was hard work. So our agenda has two things remaining on, well, several things remaining, but two things that are important. One is D. We wanted to have a discussion on strategy for structuring a future planning commission discussion about factors affecting commercial businesses or properties that have or may be considering relocating outside of downtown Rehoboth Beach. So we don't have a structured conversation in mind. We could spend maybe 10 minutes or so doing that. And another model I like is that maybe someone could take ownership about and create some bullet points and things that we could discuss at the next meeting. But I'm open to spending time on it now, but I don't want to tire people out. And we definitely want to talk about clear space. So those are my concerns at this point in the afternoon. Joyce?
Yeah, unmute.
Unmute, please.
Joyce, you have to unmute.
Unmute. Start over, Joyce.
I just want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Where does that come under our purview of the Planning Commission to look at something? I understand the question and why it's up there, but if we're dealing with, is it dealing with land use, or where does that fit in?
And I think that's a really important clarifying question. I mean, this topic definitely fits in with land use and the Planning Commission, you know, all land use of all kinds.
Okay.
But I do think we have to have a discussion that's focused on land use issues and not generational change in ownerships of businesses. Things we can't control or ordinances are not controlling are outside of the wheelhouse.
That was my question.
Yeah, so we would have to do that, but I do think we're going to need an owner to move this ahead.
So Jeff, I think it's a very important issue you've raised here. I think there's a real issue about the future in terms of friendliness to business community and encouraging businesses to stay or relocate or to locate in the city. So I personally would like to have a time or when we can discuss this in some depth, you know, on our agenda. It doesn't have to be right away, but I think we should do this because I think we need to look at what disincentives exist and what incentives can be done that would benefit the city and benefit the business community. I'm sure we're going to touch part of it in the CDP, but I think that, you know, we should have some thoughts to give to the commission in terms of what legislative or what other types of actions, for example, changes to codes they may want to take, because we have lost. And you know, I was pretty upset when the one Gaddafi or whatever they're called, you know, out of Lewis left. And I think that that's our life. I would like to see that on the agenda at some point. I don't know what other.
Wonderful. Anybody else have thoughts on this topic?
Well, yeah, Jeff, I think I was one of the people that brought it up originally. I think it definitely ties to the responsibilities of the Planning Commission, because I could be wrong, but I think we're going to find that some of the reasons why
I can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Hear me
now?
No, we can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's definitely tied to responsibilities of the Planning Commission, because I believe that some of the issues that are going to come up when we discuss this are parking or infrastructure or the type of things we're dealing with in the CDP. I think that that's probably the kind of issues we're going to hear from, you know, if and when we talk to these businesses.
So it sounds like between now, we could perhaps have this on the December agenda. We could have have a discussion behind the scenes and try to advance some bullet points for topics to be discussed, and then continue the strategy session at the December meeting. Everybody feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, great. I think we're good there.
Okay.
Okay, so letter E, it's not an executive session. I got things a little bit out of order when I did the agenda and didn't have confirmation. This is really not about the city solicitor, although he's certainly willing to chime in with regards to the October 29 and Thursday, November 12th meeting, and the public hearing, the need for a public hearing coming back to us. I've talked to many of you over since yesterday. Many of you watched the meeting, and I think that was very helpful to have your firsthand impressions and immediately afterwards. And I do think we have to start our preparations because there is some time urgency and there's some limitations as well. So we are going to need to have another public hearing, and I'd like to get that on the schedule. Considering the things like notice, Ms. Womack will need 2 weeks notice. The charge of how we're going to conduct the planning meeting, the public hearing, how the topics that we're going to consider from the appeal, the record that's going to be available, maybe perhaps making the record very easily accessible electronically in one place in a folder for the public, for us, for everybody. The holidays upon us. I'd like to look at a date in January, maybe mid to late January. And I've emailed Ms. Womack to look at some dates that might be possible. And I think that would give us enough time to prepare. I think it would have to be a special meeting because, we were all, most of us were there in September and October. Those were long meetings. They take a lot of endurance. And I would assume that everybody who spoke then is going to speak now, and maybe even some more people. So I don't think we want to jam up the agenda for a regular meeting. I'll have to work with Ann Womack behind the scenes to make sure that we have all the documents available. And this is mostly administrative work. I'll have to work with Brian Patterson and perhaps some other people too to craft how we're going to approach the public hearing and the topics that will be reviewed and decided upon at the public hearing. I was reaching for a word because I'd like to say that would satisfy all parties. I would hope that we can do that, but I don't want to set that expectation. So I'm trying to look for the right words, but I'm very, very concerned about how a delay makes decisions, may be making decisions for clear space or the community or one way or the other. Taking too much time is going to have implications for everybody. So I think we don't have to be special or rushed or anything. We have to have enough time to do it right, but we certainly don't want to not review it until next June. So we have to act faster than that. So I see some hands going up, so maybe I've talked enough to generate some questions. So Joyce, would you like to go first?
Yeah, when they come back to us, are we back at square one, or what is the status then when?
I'm glad.
Hearing based on what?
So I don't have all of that formulated yet, but we do not need to go back to the preliminary reviews and the earlier reviews. The complaint, everything is about what happened in July and August, and what happened at those meetings are the time frame.
Okay.
For instance, I think you said, and I said at one of the meetings too, not having these legible drawings in time was a problem. And, you know, that is basically one of the things that was remanded back to us and that moved the Board of Commissioners. So
we're correcting things that may have been awry, and that's okay.
Right, and there may be things that have been disposed of or obsolete in the complaints. I don't.
All right, can new data come in?
Can new data come in?
Data come in from either side, from their lawyers or ours or whatever? Yes.
So I can't answer that yet, but we'll get to that question. Okay. Can we let Steve talk now? Go ahead, Mr. Kaufman.
Well, a couple things, just to respond very quickly. Since it's a de novo hearing, you can take new evidence generally. We'll have to depend on what counsel says and the other lawyers on the commission. But I'd like to focus on the remand itself. They remanded it saying that basically we did not have everything that we needed to have before we scheduled the meeting. So what I'd like to see is a couple things. Number one, we can incorporate the previous hearings record into our record, what's there. So, you know, that we can do that. Secondly, I think before we actually schedule it, although I agree very much with you, Jeff, that we try to do it in January, I think we need from Glenn and from anybody else, maybe it's the building inspector, that we have now received everything we need to receive in sufficient form for us to schedule the meeting, because that's why we were told to have a read. So, for example, if the architectural drawings were not sufficiently clear and were not distributed in places where the public could see it, we need to make sure that that happens. We need to make sure that everything that was asked of the applicant as part of the presentation that they were going to make is in the record. So once we get that from either the city manager and Glenn, then I think we can actually schedule the meeting and give the right notices. That way we can go forward and hopefully we'll have everything so that we don't have to do this again. Because I agree with you, time is very much of the essence to this applicant. And I don't want the delays to be the reason that they don't get where they need to go. There could be other reasons, but I don't want that to be the reason. So that's my recommendation.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear from Brian and maybe Mike as well.
Yeah, so Mike Bryan has his hand up. Mike, you'll need to unmute.
Just a question for Glenn, please. There were a number of what I would characterize as summary motions that the commissioners heard and ruled upon before they reached the ultimate decision on the merits. Have all of the summary motions been ruled upon at this point by the commissioners? And the reason I ask is, are we going back to just deal with the ones left that were sent on the remand, or are there others out there that need to be resolved? And should we then, if it comes back to us, come back on everything that needs to be resolved, or are we just dealing with a few at this point and there are others that commissioners have not ruled on?
So there are others that the commissioners have not ruled on, but they were essentially dismissed at the day. So they made the determination that because they had made a decision to remand, those outstanding motions did not need to be ruled upon, and they were essentially dismissed. So the procedural posture is that you are now, the Planning Commission is now, in my view, at a place just prior to the public hearing where you are now able to make a determination, as the code says, to determine whether additional information is needed from the applicant or others, whether there are other legal or factual issues that need for clarification prior to final action at a subsequent meeting. Then it says the public hearing, it says an applicant who has addressed the issues, if any identified during preliminary review, shall have the public hearing. So I think that often alluded to, there needs to be a determination that you all have received and it's ready to go to a public. We got beat up a little bit in this procedure for scheduling a public hearing while there is still information we had asked for the applicant to bring back. to the planning commission. So I think step one is make the determination that you have everything that you need to go to a public hearing. If indeed that's what you if that believe to be the case, then schedule the public hearing. So I think, and I do think this discussion really should be limited to procedurally what needs to happen to get it scheduled, not anything about the merits of the application today anyways, because that's not how it was noticed. So I think that the chairperson should look for a date that you can do step one, which is meet for the purposes of saying we've got everything we need, the documents are available to the public, and schedule the public hearing at that meeting. And the next meeting would be the actual public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe.
One comment. Chair, you're muted, but are you recognizing me? So yeah, just one reaction to on the timeline. I mean, I agree with what Steve said, and I understand what Glenn is saying. If for example we were to put it on the agenda for the December regular meeting as old business, in order to do that thing that Glenn just described, to say we've got all the information we need and we can now schedule a public hearing, then we can of course get the applicant and anyone else, they have noticed that we're doing that, they can come in, they can tell us that no, you're missing something, or they can provide anything that they want then. But one concern I have with, and so then we could put it on the agenda for a public hearing in January. One concern I have about that sequence though is, not to get into the merits, but one other thing we got beat up on in the motions for the appeal was the issue of site visit, and that some have visited the site and others haven't visited the site, and in either case the applicants and the public weren't there when the visits occurred. And so a question as a matter of additional facts that may be needed is whether we should whether we should notice a public site visit so that the applicant and anyone else who wants to go to the site and show us any facts there that are material, so that we all have the same information and the applicant has the opportunity to be heard on that, and the public has the opportunity to be heard. So we couldn't get that done in time for the December regular meeting. And so if at the December regular meeting we decide we have all the facts we need, then we're obviously not going to do that site visit. So maybe we would need to have an interim special meeting in order to get all these things lined up by the end of January.
How are we going to do that? We're all going to get together, put a mask on and walk around? I don't.
Well, so Barry, I think your question is about if we did a site visit, can we even do it in this COVID era?
Exactly.
Or, could we do it as a virtual meeting, and how we would do it? There are a bunch of logistics, but I kind of agree with Brian that it's worth asking a few questions about making a determination, asking questions and making a determination whether such a special virtual meeting is possible or needed. It may not be needed for the record, but it is one of those many elements that we need some clarity on.
I mean, that's something we could do at the December regular meeting. If we put it on the agenda, the applicant and members of the public can tell us what do they think about that. Is that something that they think we need to do or that we shouldn't do? And at least we would know.
May I ask a question about the site visit? I'm sorry, I still don't understand.
Sure, go ahead.
Can't hear you, Rachel.
Rachel, you're fading out. We may have lost you.
Are you there?
Me? Can you hear me?
You're back now, yes.
Okay, so my question is, what is the issue with site visits? I mean, we all go and do site visits as it relates to partitioning of properties. I go and do site visits for every park, shade, and tree case that I have. So what is the issue with site visits?
I can briefly respond. I don't want to get into it too much, but I talked about this in the response, in the motion response that we just dealt with. So there's some public comments that I've already made. Site visits, my view of the law on site visits is that site visits are not per se invalid, illegal, not to be done. You can do a site visit. The issue becomes you can't base your decision on an application on just those elements you learned while you were at the site visit. So if you stand at that property and you do a traffic count and you say, man, there's a lot of traffic here, there's no way I could ever approve a theater in this location. And you come back and when you're voting, say, when I was on my site visit, I noticed how much traffic there was, and for that reason, I'm not voting for this application. Site visits are supposed to inform you as to the nature of the area, the character of the neighborhood. So it's supposed to inform your decision about the evidence brought into the record. So then when somebody brings in a traffic report and says, there's a lot of traffic in the area, you give that traffic report probably a little bit more weight than you might otherwise because you've been there, you understand the situation, you've seen the circumstances. So you can't base your decision, certainly not exclusively on those things, but you can use it to inform the evidence that comes in.
Did any of us ever say that we based our decision exclusively on a site visit? I don't.
No, and again, I don't want to get into the merits of those motions, but I can tell you we went through the record, and not one of you said, "Here's what I learned at the site visit, and that's why I'm voting the way I'm voting."
All right, no. That's good. That helps. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just by way of information, site visits can be done in one of two ways. You can individually go, and as Glenn said, it's something you consider, but it's not the only reason you can base a decision. Or you can go as a group where you notice that you're going to go as a group. Given the current COVID situation, what I think might be helpful, if it's Glenn just gives us a memo telling us that site visits are in fact legal, and that if you do visit the site individually as a planning commission member, you can consider it as part of your decision. It's not the only thing you can base your decision on. If we get that instruction, then each of us can decide whether we want to go and visit it or not. But in my 45 years of experience as a land use lawyer, those are the two ways that you can do a site visit.
That's right.
So if that's the case, then I think we should follow what Glenn said earlier, is for Jeff and Brian to make sure we have all the documents that we need to proceed to a hearing, but to try to get a special hearing scheduled for January. I don't want to wait till December to see we have it, and then go ahead and maybe not get it in January, but go into February, because I know time is of the essence here.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I'll identify several dates, and we'll back up with the notice requirements and what else is on Ann's workload. Lee?
Yeah, I just want to say, I could be wrong, but I don't recall there being any additional information that was needed. It was just the timing of the information we had, and that some feel that had concerns that the information too late. The traffic study they got 48 hours before the hearing, didn't have time to digest it, or they couldn't read the plans. I don't think there was any, hey, there's additional information that has yet to show up of what was submitted. And so in that respect, I would think we have everything. Get plans that are legible and make them appropriately available. And everything else, I think people have it. They just didn't have time at the time to review it fully.
Yeah, I want to find out, working with some of the city staff, if everything that was attached to those agendas can be put on the website in one place, and we can direct everybody to one link, perhaps. So the organization, but I agree with you. I'm glad we discussed this site visit, because You know, I mean, I was thinking conceptually a notice, special meeting, site visit, but I mean, the news report is, there's no way we're gathering a group of 20 people in the next 6 months. So that's just off the table.
At the risk of causing any more trouble, let me just make one other comment. And I apologize, but I think it needs to be said. You know, many hearings are scheduled and then other information comes in before the hearing, even if it's not all there before the hearing is scheduled. That's generally done in the nation, all over the country. If we now go to where we are with this particular one, where in every case we have to have everything submitted before a hearing is even scheduled, I think we're going to tie one hand behind our back. Now, although I think this is a very important case, but I don't think it would be the precedent for the future. As long as everything is in a record before you actually have the hearing and proper notice is given, things often come in after you schedule a hearing. In fact, things come in even after you have the hearing if you've requested them and you make your decision conditioned upon those other things being submitted. So I think we need to think about this and think about what's best for the city and what's most efficient for the city, not just in this case, but all our cases. So, you know, this one, we have to do it this way by the numbers because we've been directed to do it by the numbers, but I wouldn't want it to be a precedent for the future, since I don't think that would be the best thing for the city, not to be able to have some flexibility. Apologize, but that's my thought.
Mike?
Yeah, in reference to Steve's observation, I think I'd like to ask Glenn, with what we're about to do, doesn't set any precedent, does it? We're just following through on a request, and we're not doing anything differently than has been done in the past in this kind of situation.
I think that's right. I think what I would comment on is that these circumstances are different than others in that, for example, you know, there are 21 appellants who are scrutinizing the Planning Commission, and this one we want to do more and less, and that's why we are. But I agree with Mr. Kaufman that that practice of scheduling a public hearing, you know, in advance, but waiting for materials to come in, even accepting materials after the hearing, that is not an uncommon practice. So, but in this case, so to your point, no, I don't think this is precedent.
Okay.
Okay,
but sorry, just to put a pin in that,
Brian.
Steve. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Steve makes a good point, and it's not a precedent, but I do think it does. We should take a look at our rules and our application for site plan review, because it was the very strict, maybe rigid wording in there, which the appellants were able to hang their hat on, and that's not consistent with the practice that Steve describes. That maybe, you know, maybe the better, more practical practice. It's certainly, we've set a rule that's way above minimum due process. Right. And if we can't follow that rule, then we should look at it.
And we should change it.
Look at it.
Thanks,
Good.
Brian.
Thank you, Brian. I think that's helpful.
Chairman?
Yes.
I just want to remind you, you're closing in on 4:30.
Yes, we're going to get there. Thank you so much for the reminder.
While we have Ian, you provided me a link to a folder that is accessible by the public that has all the airspace spot documents. Is there a way that we can, are we okay with making that publicly available?
That was for the motions.
Right, but it was all related to the motions. Does that series of folders have all of the record documents in it as well or not?
I would have to take a look.
Okay, well, we can work on it next week. I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all for that. So, so we have a plan, and we'll start working on that behind the scenes, and Brian and I will meet and consult with Glenn as necessary to put that together. Thank you. Okay, Building inspector report. Anything you'd like to update us on?
No, other than I like to say we've been performing our regular duties and getting the permits out as expedient as we can. And we anticipate how many for new construction coming up?
So we've got about 15 demos that have been applied for. 4 of those have been submitted for the new houses. So we're going to have at least 10 to 12 new submittals for new construction.
Okay. Any questions for the building inspector? Great. Okay, city solicitors report. Anything else you'd like to add, Glenn?
No, other than a short meeting today with a couple commissioners and the building officials about the gross floor area issue that continues to be lingering out there, but I think we assembled a pretty good plan for restructuring that ordinance. I won't get into the details of it, but more to come soon.
Good. We'll look forward to the discussions on that. And any new applications that may have been timely submitted?
No new application.
Okay, no applications. That gives us some breathing room. Thank you so much. And then, so the agenda items for the December 11th meeting, we may have one on the appeals and the clear space in the new public hearing. We can expect one or both of these preliminary applications to come back for public hearing. I would suspect they'll both try to make the date. And of course, we will have a session with Debbie File to talk about what we're going to do, what our charge is going to be for reviewing the CDP when we get it. Joyce, did you have a question?
No, I'm fine.
Oh,
thank you.
okay, good. And nobody has a scheduling conflict with the next meeting on the 11th? Everybody's good?
Yes.
Shall we adjourn? Thank you so much.
No. Thank you.
Anyone have a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for helping with the long meeting. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Great job. Bye-bye.